Live from Fort Defiance, hard by the Supreme Court. It is Friday, the 27th of March, year of our Lord 2020. We are live in the War Room on War Room Pandemic, also on the John Frederick Radio Network, on americasvoice.news, the streaming platform for the Trump Revolution. Now, Dish, Channel 219, Newsmax TV, FM 99.1 and 103.9 in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and globally, reaching 250 million English-speaking folks from Latin America to Africa to the Middle East, Israel, Russia, Eastern Europe, Northern Italy, India, and Australia. Also in Mandarin language later in the day, subtitled on G News, where we blow through the firewall to get to the VPN so the people, the hardworking, decent folks in mainland China can hear exactly what's going on the worldwide pandemic. Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, Jason Miller, and a special guest appearance by Raheem Kassam. He's off the sick list, back working. Boris Johnson goes on. Raheem Kassam comes back. That's the way we roll.
It's like a soccer match.
It's like a soccer match.
Or football, as Raheem would say.
Every day we look at the pandemic. We look at the economic crisis it triggered, both the current crisis and also the deeper issues regarding the supply chain. And on top of that, the financial crisis, this once-in-a-generation financial crisis that is now melting down capital markets throughout the world. We layer on top of that the geopolitical issues coming out of our allies in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, that's in the process of destroying the American energy sector, particularly the fracking business in Pennsylvania and in West Texas. And also the great demon in this, the Chinese Communist Party. Not the Chinese people are among the most decent, hardworking people on this earth, and they are oppressed by a group of gangsters, a group of thugs that now have visited us upon it. And I'm not talking about a P4 lab in Wuhan. I'm saying there's suppression of information, as we know, from the tweets of the head of the World Health Organization, who on January 14th said, after consultation with Chinese authority, there is no human-to-human transfer that they know of. We'll be getting into all of that in the days and weeks ahead, as we look to who's accountable for this. But right now, we've got to get through this pandemic, and there's a lot of confusion. What's happening? How fast is it happening? How intense is it happening? And what's the remedies for that? The White House now is talking about a triage county by county by county in the United States, or maybe a quadrant system to open back up. While New Orleans, New York, and Detroit hurtle towards, at least on, looks like, Easter weekend, some sort of potential crisis. We're going to get in back of all that. We just showed you in the last hour this throwdown in Capitol Hill between a young congresswoman who's part of the Dirty 30, those Trump districts that were won back by the Democrats in 2018 and led directly to the impeachment of Donald J. Trump. She's throwing down on Steny Hoyer. So this thing is getting to be quite intense. And to help us think this through, someone we've seen now with Jason Miller and on the new Sean Spicer show, which is terrific on Newsmax TV. If you haven't had a chance to watch that, Sean is a fantastic guy. But they're breaking a new star there, known as not our Jason Miller, right? He's kind of close to stardom. But Jessica Deloach, who's a Democratic consultant and strategist. Jessica, just the question I want to put to you first, leave the politics aside. Where do you think we are in the pandemic part of this? Take your political hat off. Just as a citizen, where do you think we are in this pandemic right now?
Well, I think we're in a very scary place because there is a lot of confusion surrounding the pandemic, where we are, what it means, how we're going to get past it. I know that you guys have been promoting, this smashing this curve, and I 100% support that because right now we have communities all across the country that you don't have a lot of team players in. You still have people going out, hanging out, gathering in groups larger than 10, basically ignoring the fact that this pandemic is real. We have coronavirus parties happening in cities across the country, which is insane. And, until we straighten up and fly right, so to speak, we're not going to get past this. And it's scary because President Trump has been on the receiving end of a lot of criticism based on the way he's chosen to handle this. He's also facing, though, pressure from the business community, the economic pressures, and then also just the reality that our hospitals are facing, our caregivers are facing. and he has to find a way to be reassuring in a very uncertain time. I'm sure you've seen the cover of the New York Times this morning regarding the unemployment rates, or the unemployment insurance claims, I mean. And when you see something like that, it's very startling. So there's a lot of perception that needs to be put into context, and also just an agreement among the American people about how we're going to dig in and get past this. Because unless we take some pretty stringent measures to kind of keep ourselves healthy, this isn't going to go away.
Jessica, let me ask you this question. So do you see there being a divide right now between Republicans and Democrats on this issue, or is this a urban versus rural type divide that we're seeing play out across
Or is
the
it
country?
generational?
Oh, that's a great point.
Sure. Well, I think that all three of those things are true. Generational, yes, because young people have a tendency to think that they can weather anything, or that they won't get sick. And now what we're seeing every day when you log on Twitter, young people are coming down with the coronavirus, and they're actually dealing with a lot of the same extreme symptoms of it, being on ventilators, basically making their way to life support. It's really scary. And you're starting to see your friends who are your age dying. Or you'll see them saying, I just lost my cousin to this. I didn't think that would happen. He or she was young and healthy. As far as the Democrats go and the Republicans go, yes, Democrats and Republicans will always find a way to disagree with each other. But for the most part, I'd like to think that they're equally committed to getting us past this. But how we get past this, I think, is going to remain up for debate. And then also you have the federal and state and local coming into play, and the leadership there, and what some people want versus the orders that are being handed down from on high. That's very confusing for people. And then as far as urban and rural goes, I'm from South Arkansas. I know what it's like to live in a place where your neighbors are far away, and for people to live in a bubble and to think, I'm going to be just fine riding this out. But if you live in a really dense area in a big city, yeah, you should be nervous. And I don't know how you translate that message to rural America, but I'll tell you what, when this disease starts making its way through rural America, it's going to get super scary, because access to hospitals isn't always there for the people who need it the most.
Let me ask you I have a tendency to jump in here, so just Jason. No, Haley Stevens. Yeah. Haley Stevens is in a throwdown on the House floor with Steny Hoyer, effectively one of her bosses. And it's about the economic bill that was just passed, the stimulus bill, or what we call the relief bill, the $2 trillion, or what's about to be voted on. What is your assessment as a Democrat of, because we say, look, you got a pandemic, triggered economic crisis, we had a collapse in aggregate demand. What is your assessment as a Democrat of does this bill work or does it not work?
It works for right now, and I'm not sure how long right now lasts. Because the economy is going to continue moving forward. I mean, we live in a capitalist democracy, and, business isn't going to shut down. $1,200 checks aren't meant to be a bailout. They're Band-Aids, and they aren't going to stretch very far. For some reason, people just started figuring out yesterday that income is going to be taxed, but it's income. So yes, it's going to be taxed, and not everyone's getting a $1,200 check. I am curious about whether or not the government is going to have to issue more checks to people, depending on how long this goes on, how many bailouts or whatever you want to call it, how many of those will we see? It gets scary and it gets expensive, and I'm not sure how long this package that was just passed will get us down the road, or how far, I mean.
Jessica, you were a senior strategist on the Pete Buttigieg presidential campaign. You were the chief of staff to Chasten, and so you have experience in the Democratic presidential field. What the heck are you guys going to do about Joe Biden? And here's why I ask. It's in a time of national crisis like this, it's tough to play politics. It's tough to go and advance a presidential campaign and to find your lane, to find your relevance in this. But recently, he's Joe Biden looks like he's auditioning to join War Room. He looks like he's auditioning to come down here with Stephen, Raheem, and Jack and myself and be a podcaster, essentially. What is your advice to the Biden campaign for how he can message his campaign going forward?
Sure. I would not wish these circumstances on any political candidate. It's really complicated because, let's set aside the emotions that come with living through an experience like this, which most people in the United States have never had something this severe happen in their lives, at least not on such a large scale. So if you are running for president and you are running against a sitting president, The one thing that you will have to face every day is that Donald Trump will be in the news. He already has a way of commanding headlines and staying in the news. He will be there through the duration of the coronavirus, and the country is looking for him to lead. It's no different than George W. Bush leading after September 11th of 2001. People want to be reassured. They want security. They have a tendency to look to the person who is their designated leader. Joe Biden, I think, has great respect for what the world is going through right now, and I think it's probably really difficult to get too political about this. Now, what you could do, and what he could continue doing and do to an even greater extent, would be to advocate for hospitals and for healthcare workers to have the things that they need, to speak to communities, from the heart, and just say, look, we're going through a hard time, and figuring out a way to parlay that message and say, if you want a person to provide leadership and care, I can do that. He most likely would benefit from pointing out the ways that the Trump administration has bungled some of this pandemic. But quite honestly, it's kind of hard to imagine not bungling some aspects of it. I'm not here to apologize for the things that have gone wrong, but no one would get this right from the start.
Last question before we go is, would you advocate a hard lockdown right now? And if you did, why?
Yes, I would. I would, because we've left these lockdowns or this self-quarantining in the hands of people thinking or hoping that we would appeal to their intellect to say, hey, all you have to do is make this sacrifice right now, because if we do this, then we can definitely flatten this curve, because that's what we've seen other countries do. But people haven't been taking that seriously. Now, I get it. There are people who can't not work. And there is a way, I believe, to have a really hard lockdown, but to allow people who need to work to go to work. But the government would have to find a way to support these people while this hard lockdown is going on. There are other things for people to think about, such as if I don't pay my bills, then this goes to a debt collector. If it goes to a debt collector, it ends up on my credit report. Then I have a negative mark on my report for years. There's so many concerns to have. And people want to be fiscally responsible, but in a time of emergency, they're going to put survival first. So there's a big gap that has to be bridged. And I'd like to think that people are willing to make that sacrifice if it means saving lives and getting things back on track in the world.
Jessica, thank you. Actually, I do have one more question, and Steve said no crass political question, so I got to ask a crass political question. What are the odds we're going to see Biden dump for Andrew Cuomo?
I am going to lean on what I believe is at the core of the Democratic Party, which is to respect what voters have said they wanted so far. Right now he's the presumptive nominee. Bernie Sanders has not dropped out, and that's perfectly fine. I'd like to think that he's going to move forward with this nomination, but stranger things have happened, and conventions have rules that allow people to show up and succeed based on what they present then and there. So it's possible. That's what I've learned, and people should have learned that when President Trump was elected to office. Anything is possible.
Jessica, what's your Twitter handle? How do people get more access to Jessica DeLoach?
Sure. Well, read with caution. So it's at Jessica Zan. That's JESSICAXAN. And I'll write you back.
She's one of the new stars with Jason Miller and the new Sean Spicer show on Newsmax TV. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us in the War Room today. Short commercial break. We're going to return.
Thanks, guys.
We're going to return back to Capitol Hill with updates in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic on Capitol Hill. We're having a feisty time over in the Capitol trying to push this $2 trillion. Did Jessica DeLoach call it a Band-Aid? Or did you call it a Band-Aid?
No, she called it a Band-Aid.
I noticed.
I found myself agreeing with her.
The $1,200 checks being a Band-Aid.
$1,200 check. I thought Jack was starting to tweet out Barry Goldwater quotes when that happened. So I just
No, listen.
poor Jack, his blood pressure's up. He's all worked up this morning.
I'm going to have a stroke watching the
she-
country
by the way,
go commie.
She's terrific. That's why the best thing Spicer's got on the show is not Sean Spicer. As much as I love him, it's the best thing he's got on the show. He's got Miller and Deloche, which is pretty good combo.
We got some great feedback on that as well. Asiv Molotov on Twitter saying, "Wow, guys, a Democrat on your show. That's awesome. I like you guys presenting both sides of the aisle. Please keep it up."
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. You've got some breaking news out of Europe. Give us that. Jack's got some of that. I want to get this doctor that was on CNBC this morning from Brigham and Women's in Boston. I want to get him on.
Yeah, I have an awful lot of breaking news out of Europe, but we'll stick to Italy because Italy is what we're focusing on most at the moment. The head of the Superior Health Institute of Italy has come out, Silvio Brusaferro, come out this morning and said, while there are signs of a slowdown, Italy has not yet reached its coronavirus peak. When the descent begins, quote, how steep it is will depend on our behavior, but stressing we haven't reached the peak and we haven't passed it. That's breaking coming out of Italy this afternoon in Italy.
You have some news from Spain also?
Well, look, I mean, Spain, I've been talking about now for weeks, people not paying attention to Spain, but if you go into the Financial Times, which they update their graphs every day on this and have some of the best infographics on this, you can see that Catalonia and Madrid have far higher in terms of cumulative number of death trajectories than the Lombardy region has right now. The distinction is people don't realize that Spain doesn't have a healthcare system in the way that we know it. It is not an interconnected, well-resourced and well-staffed healthcare system. It just doesn't function like a first world country as we think of Spain. And there are other places out there at the moment, Jack, I know you want to jump in on this, that are going to have similar problems as well. But we talked for a moment about what's going on in the Alsace region in France. They've been practicing triage now for 2 weeks there. The Germans going in there today saying, hey, medics are no longer ventilating certain patients. Terminal care is now being offered with opiates and barbiturates. All around the world, this is metastasizing to a degree, by the way, that a lot of, I hate to say this because, I am a great fan of this country, but I'm not a great fan of your news media. This doesn't get reported very much over here. And what's going on in the world is going to inform and should be informing what takes place here.
One thing it's going to inform is about the economics. This is why we did the economic crisis, is that put the humanitarian thing aside, which is absolutely central to it, but you just take a practical point of view. Europe's collapse, right, and the collapse of aggregate demand in Europe is going to actually drive us into a harder recession. Our economies, we're nationalists, but the economies are inextricably linked. There's no doubt about that, and we're very tied to the European economy. Europe going into it was already trending towards recession. Italy was already in one. They were afraid Germany was going to be in one. This is why this call with the G20 was so important the other day. This is why the call with the G7 was so important the other day, is that you have to have a coordinated response fiscally, stimulus. You need the Germans to step up here and put up, basically, Europe needs to have $1 trillion or $2 trillion stimulus package, just like the United States had as phase one. Also, you need coordination by the central banks. The European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the United States, and the Bank of Tokyo all have to work in unison, right? Taking Powell as the lead, or you're going to have a collapse of the global financial markets, which is going to imply. So that's why we pride ourselves in trying to say, hey, here's the canary in the mine shaft in these other countries is going to blow back the economics. Look at Italy right now. The Italian banks are right on the edge, right? And the Italian economy is going to have a massive, I think, lead to a in Italy or maybe worse.
The subject of the New York Times editorial board's op-ed today, talking about the distinction between, the Danish promising people 90% of their salaries. In the Netherlands, at least 20%. In the United Kingdom, at least 80%, with no cap on the total amount of public spending in order to get it there. You can see that the Europeans are deeply, deeply concerned about everything to do with disposable income, money in people's pockets, paying rent, keeping up with all of this stuff. And the New York Times obviously concluding this piece saying America appears to be choosing mass unemployment instead of these drastic,
key part,
unending public spending plans here. I don't take a view on that. It's just the debate that's going on.
This is why the Haley Stevens thing is so important when you tie it together. She's in, remember from War Room Impeachment, she's the Dirty 30. It was Michael Bloomberg's $100 million. I ran around, and many of you in the audience remember, Trumpet War. We went to, guess where we went? To the 30 congressional districts that were in play. This was not rocket science. You understood that these Trump districts that Obama won twice, that flip back to President Trump, are the key to the kind of the swing in the House, and the House is everything. They put the $100 million up. They recruited kind of right from central casting, whether it's Max Rose in Staten Island or Stemberger down in my old congressional district, my home in Richmond, Virginia. You know, CIA agents, Army officers, the woman from Naval Academy up in New Jersey 7, the combat helicopter pilot. You know, they won. That's why the Dirty 30 is so important going forward for the political direction of the country. Haley Stevens is a young congresswoman who won in that one of those districts. The reason she's in a throwdown on the House floor right now, by having her Democratic superiors trying to give her the hook, right? She wants more time because it's about the economic, this relief bill, how quickly the cash actually gets to people in the districts, both the businesses and the small guy, because she understands at the end of the day, and this is about that tweet last night from the former Obama guy in the in FEMA guy, that the response of the hospital units and in the healthcare system and the response of the government in kind of bridging this is going to her political and she's totally concerned about her citizens. I'm not questioning that, but she also, from a practical point of view, when she's over there in the well, understands it's got to get there, and if it doesn't get there, she's going to be out of a job, right? And this is why we're quickly, I think, hurtling to a political crisis, right? We're hurtling to a political crisis. One, does the system respond well enough? The thing we're having here today with Congressman Massey. Now, Massey, look, he's not my cup of tea because he voted against the Hong Kong situation. He's a hardcore libertarian. I do respect the libertarians. I understand where he comes from. But you see, even today, we're having this whole debate, are they going to come back or not, remote voting? I am not a fan of remote voting. I think if you're going to have a vote, you got to show up. If we start doing remote voting, you never know where these guys are going. I'm all for shutting down how long they're here, right? You should be like states where you have certain periods they're here and then they go home to the districts. But if you let them start remote voting, it's just like if you do remote voting, if this starts to come up, remote voting in these campaigns, you never know where the fraud's going to come from. You'll never control it, right? So you're seeing our entire political system now having to – so I've kept the floor. You
and I are totally in agreement on this, Steve. I hope that Massey shuts it down. I hope they're forced to come back and vote. You know, the enlisted are sitting there on the deck, and they're waiting to see these captains who are supposed to be in charge of this ship. And when you think about this, I mean, the Constitution requires their presence. I don't know where in the Constitution it requires that they hand out $1,200 checks or bail out everybody for bad things. I also think that, we need to start talking about some things on the global basis that have nothing to do with politics. We need to start talking about starvation. I just received a video from one of our listeners in South Africa. They're already looting stores on day number 2 of their lockdown. So if the president, I believe...
Because there's not enough food? Is that there's no food distribution? Is that your point?
If they shut you down for 21 days and you didn't get the word early enough to get your food for 21 days, now they're going to get their food.
There's also a thing we're seeing. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
And I think that one of the things that we need to be concerned, we try to tell our viewers that we're weeks ahead of this, 6 months ahead of this. One thing that we can be sure of, almost as a historical imperative, famine will follow this disease. And the United States and Brazil have the capacity to feed the entire world. My recommendation to the president would have been to spend $150 billion instead of $2 trillion and buy the entire grain market of America. That's our entire export. And then he should go in combination with Bolsonaro And then by default, we have a little cartel, and we can take care of our friends.
No, Brazil and the United States could form the OPEC of food. There's no
Absolutely
doubt about that.
correct.
We're two superpowers. In a world, there's only two superpowers, right? If you did that, you could actually, I think, change the world quite. Go ahead.
I just want to stay in Latin and South America for a moment here because there are a couple articles that popped yesterday about China launching a charm offensive in South America, and they're sending aid. And Venezuela is a big concern as well. They're trying to help with a number of other countries. And here's the concern: it's not just South America; it's in Africa. It's even depending on where things go with our relationship with India. Obviously, India and China have had long time headbutting. Europe is another huge place. But let's take Venezuela, which is in our backyard, for just a moment here. I mean, especially with us putting the sanctions then in place, what is a Venezuela going to look like, whether it's a Maduro or a next leader after that, if China is set up there to swoop in and all of a sudden then have that oil production? These are different points all around the world. So we think about what's next.
We're in a hot war right now with the Chinese Communist Party. Remember, in unrestricted warfare, information war / cyber, economic war, kinetic war. We're in a hot war information-wise, and we're in a hot war economically. There's no doubt. Real quickly before we go, in 15 seconds, you've been talking about this famine for weeks and weeks and weeks. Potential. Now the mainstream media is starting to pick it up. What were your concerns when you started talking about it?
Well, when I first started looking at it, you look historically, famine follows pandemics because you lose your labor force, you lose people planting in the spring, particularly here in Africa. We've seen it throughout history. We also have a large locust storm in the Middle East, so there's a lot of things that we need to keep an eye on.
I remember when we were talking about Wuhan and Hubei, you said, hey, they're going to have to go back to work to get the spring planting, if not to open the factories. You were first on this. Okay, we're in pandemic. We're going to return with the team to Fort Defiance on Capitol Hill in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Episode 79 with over 4.6 million downloads on the podcast. And Raheem, now that you're back, can you hawk the podcast where people should go to get it?
I've forgotten.
And how to give reviews and all that?
Yeah, warroom.org is the URL. Pandemic.warroom.org is the website for all things pandemic related, and the team, Kyle and the rest of the team, doing a great job in keeping that updated with breaking up to the minute information. You can find all the ways to download the podcast at warroom.org/podcast.
Remember, because of the great team at WABC, we have an afternoon show. It's New York centric. However, we get to all the issues right now. The Wuhan of America's Hubei province, and our Wuhan is New York City. So please join us at 5 o'clock every day. Also, we're on Saturdays from 10 to noon on all of our platforms. And we're ubiquitous. We're getting feedback from the entire world, and we want to make sure. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. The other thing we would like is for you guys recommend guests and recommend topics. We may be doing off-hour stuff. We may be doing Facebook Live. We may be doing everything that America's Voice, the folks at Dish 219, Newsmax TV, John Frederick Radio Network, all of our producing partners, help us out here. I do want to say one thing what is it Cuomo starting?
I'm just going to say Governor Cuomo.
Is Cuomo bigfooting me? Bigfooting my intro?
Bigfooting you. He's starting off at the Javits Center doing his daily briefing, and with the headline, optimum is to have no apex, and they have don't overwhelm hospital capacity, and they have the current curve and then ideal flattening of the curve, no smashing of the curve, which is what they at this point, I mean, it's just
but to have no apex, in other words, have a flat, have it fairly flat.
Polo game's back as well today, which I know that you like, the polo shirt. That's
what he has to get. To get a suit and tie doesn't work.
Here's the thing I want to add to what you were just saying as well. In addition to people, recommending certain topics and things like that, I actually want to hear at the hashtag War Room Pandemic of what's going on in people's neighborhoods as well. I want
video and responses, your hospitals, all that.
I want anecdotes, Dr. Fauci,
and not just the guy with the taco.
No. The other thing I want to say, between the breaks here, it gets a little heated here at Fort Defiance. I want to quote from Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. There shall be no fighting in the war room.
You got it wrong. Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. It's the war room. No fighting in the war room.
Yeah, and what do we have? We have the head of the Treasury riding the bomb right in, right?
Wow. Can I get your Barry Goldwater quote now?
Sure. I said this earlier. I said, there's the last Republican standing, I guess. extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, as the great Barry Goldwater said.
You're not gonna take that shot over and under that 30-06 out of his dead cold hands, Jack Maxey. Okay, I want to go to this doctor that was on CNBC today at I think Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, one of the top places in the country. CEO of a company. I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, it's Atul Gawande, CEO of Haven. Let's go and play his clip. He was on with Becky Quick on Squawk Box.
On what's happening here. You talked about what happened in China, how their first response in Wuhan failed, but how they came back so much stronger and really managed to contain things. Why don't you talk a little bit about those extreme measures that they took and whether or not you think we can do that here?
Well, there was China, including then Hong Kong reacting, then Singapore, and there are lessons coming from all of Asia that suggest there's a few critical elements. First of all, you got to recognize this is a national epidemic, and we haven't woken up to that. I'm worried. I'm worried about what's emerging in a bunch of cities, not just in New York. We're talking New Orleans, Atlanta, Dallas, Miami, Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago. Our death toll curve is now worse than when China was at the same stage. We have 12 states with more than 1,500 cases. China had one province. So, what works? On the flip side, Washington State is flattening the death toll curve. And there are some key steps borrowed from that experience in Asia. Shelter in place, which some states are doing. We have about 20. We don't have the others on board, and we need really a national shelter in place. It's physical distancing and really being critical about that. It's testing and tracing contacts. And then there's work to do to recognize hospitals cannot become sources of infection. And we've got to make that not happen like it's happening in Italy and Spain.
This is why we talked about this last week about the hospitals. They think one of the fundamental mistakes they may have made in Italy, and they think the same thing. This is why China went to what they call the fever hospitals, the old London, to set up those quarantine areas. Right? They think the thinking is now is you don't get people to go to the hospitals because it could spread the disease there. But I want to step back for a second on this. The reason this is important, he nails it. And I'm so glad that we talked about it a week ago, 10 days ago. It's a national epidemic. You can see now the mainstream media is coming to the understanding of New Orleans and Detroit and these other areas. It's a national epidemic. How does one shut down a national epidemic? We can't learn the lessons from Wuhan. Okay, part of the lesson he didn't talk about, I think being politically correct, when he talked about the state of Washington, and you're a Seattle kid, and Jack Maxey knows this because he and Hatfield have worked it very hard. One of the keys in Washington was the use of the malarial drug.
The very first patient who was treated by Gilead's remdesivir was, I think, on January 31st in Washington State, and the guy made a complete recovery. He was spiraling, and 24 hours later, he wanted food and sat up in bed the next day.
But they have also used the malarial drug too, right?
Yes,
extensively.
They have, and they're using it on an experimental basis, compassionate basis, whatever.
Right.
But
it's one of the reasons that Seattle has gotten ahead of this. The state of Washington's got ahead of this because they locked down Seattle, right? All the companies pitched in. They locked down Seattle. They went to pretty extreme measures. Early on, canceled the schools, sent the university home, did everything like that. They then monitored it, patrolled it. They were the first guys to get the University of Washington to do the drive-in testing. Wasn't perfect, but it got it done. They also used every drug available on an experimental basis, right, to try to as a prophylactic and also to try to take this thing down. They brought every element that we could know to do to try to pull down the sphere. That the lesson learned is that you have many different ways to attack this, but it's got to be attacked. Well, you can't passively go.
There's
about
some
this.
really interesting stuff coming out of Germany now, right? Germany is trying to struggle with this idea of keeping the economy alive and also keeping people alive. Unlike Spain and unlike Italy, Germany has a mortality rate of 0.5%. Now, what Germany is planning on doing right now is going to a massive testing for the antibodies to this thing. Because what they're finding out that there's a significant number of the population who are probably already have immunity to this disease. And so what they're thinking about doing is testing massively and then literally giving everybody who has immunity a pass to go back to work. And to me, that makes sense. I mean, one of the things I have a huge problem with this nationwide shutdown, it's one thing to trade stocks, from your bedroom. It's another thing to milk a cow. It's another thing to bring in a harvest. And certainly when we talk about all the strawberries and lettuce and the stuff that we love so much from like the California Central Valley, that needs human beings to pick that stuff. And $1,200 isn't going to pay for my 1,000-acre field of strawberries.
But let me jump into that. I mean, having gone up to Arlington, Washington, I grew up in Seattle, but we go up to Arlington, and I think it was one of the early times when my mom was instilling some work ethic in my little brother and I. But I've gone in and picked strawberries, which, by the way, is hard and it sucks, and your back just gets destroyed. But it's look, you can do a lot of things in farm work and agriculture and things like that with instilling some social distancing, some basic things. So when we talk about national shutdown, when we talk about keeping open grocery stores or keeping open pharmacies, you're going to have to keep open certain critical elements of the delivery to those places, of the supply chain, of the working the farms. So I can't see any scenario where that shutdown would say no more dairies coming out of the Central Valley, for example.
And let me go back one more time, Jack Maxey. I want to make sure the audience knows this. Sine qua non. And when you do deals, sine qua non. That means this before that. The bridge is the sine qua non. We must have the financial bridge. We 100% agree the economy cannot be allowed to collapse. That's why it's not an either-or proposition. It's just the question that has to be answered is, do you want this thing to linger and to continue on? And they're talking about second and third waves, and even this first wave gets brought up for 3 and 4 months. On that one, I can tell you the nation can't do. And number one, because we're Americans, and we just don't roll like that. We want to get on with it, okay? That's the basis of this country is the kind of grit. Look, this is why, as my grandparents or whatever used to say kiddingly, we got kicked out, we got kicked out of every decent country in Europe and other places. That's how we ended up here because the cussedness, grit, and determination. It's the core of Trump's message. Nothing is inevitable.
Well, let's put it in context. We are Americans, right? And we've been through a lot in the past. And I have never seen more panic and more jumping around and the waving of hands and arms. If we wanted to support this economy, I had a very simple solution. Take $2 trillion, buy the S&P SPDR, and give every American a $10,000 retirement fund. Not in the room, not in the deal. You'll have everybody be a shareholder. Maybe they'll pay attention next time the wizards of Wall Street start to create a Gordian knot that can break with one cut of a string.
Yeah, but your $2 trillion in your SPDR, which is basically you're buying the exchange, you're buying an average of the exchange. If you don't get ahead of this, if you don't crush this virus, that's going to be a 10,000. Okay, so all of a sudden I'm going to wipe out my retirement thing.
Well, the dollar's going to be at 50 cents if we keep going. So I'd still rather have the stock at 12.
This is my point. You must get on it today. If you just lumber in an indecision, it just builds and builds. And you either play the ball or the ball plays you. And right now we're allowing the ball to play us. You must take direct action on this thing. The Chinese, okay, we have two broad choices. We can't do – it's too late to do to South Korea or Singapore, the mass testing and stuff like that. We're beyond that. Right now, to me, we have two alternatives. You have the alternative of Italy, which are a bunch of half measures that are sometimes you do them and sometimes you don't. Or you have the Wuhan Part 2 when the CCP understood that their entire regime was on the line and they had to drive this demon out, and that's when they dropped the hammer.
Well, the other thing, too, I mean, look, just one quick thing, do we want every metro area in the U.S. to look like a Seattle, or do we want it to look like a New York?
Well, Seattle has done no quarantining. The governor came out yesterday and said, I will never issue a quarantine order. He wants cooperation. He wants people to participate.
But he had a lockdown.
He's not arresting anybody. He's not doing anything.
No, but he had the hardest lockdown we've had to date. And correct me if I'm wrong, in Seattle, it was voluntary. But he said, we want you off the streets. Seattle's been a ghost town for how many weeks?
They shut down. Geez.
The school shut down. The University of Washington shut down. All the sports shut down. Microsoft and all these guys agreed that it's been a ghost town for
telecommuting only.
From everything. He didn't want to quarantine because he didn't want to take the quarantine. Remember, quarantine is I'm stopping people from leaving. Okay. What is the situation in New York right now? Our phones are getting blown up by people in Puerto Rico and people in Michigan and others saying, hey, there are people in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
They're saying, New York, they still got flights every day
You can't
coming
even
out.
go fishing in Seattle right now.
Listen, I talked to a person in Puerto Rico today, and Puerto Rico's kind of my adopted home. So shout out to Puerto Rico. Love you guys. Their cases are doubling.
Is this part of some tax scheme?
I wish I earned enough money to pay taxes. The Puerto Rican rate is doubling every day right now.
Yep.
The governor over a week ago requested that they stop the flights. The airlines are
11
fighting.
flights a day.
$50 billion to the airlines, and we can't even ground these people. And we're talking about shutting down the whole nation. It is a joke.
Okay, War Room Pandemic, episode 79. There shall be no fighting in the War Room, Mr. Maxey. We're going to return. Raheem Kassam, Jack Maxey, Jason Miller. The entire team will be back on a Capitol Hill now lit up in a big fight. Be back in a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Maxey, Miller, Kassam, and Bannon in the War Room on Capitol Hill. It's Friday, the 27th of March, year of our Lord 2020. We're live, and a fracas has broken out in the nation's capital. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, and also want to give some kudos to Greg Manns in the War Room, who's pulling us clips
Insane.
and getting us comments all the way through this thing, keeping tabs.
He's so much more productive when we get Raheem and Jack in here and away from bugging him. He's actually incredibly productive, right? Which is duly noted.
Our crack production team of Vish Burra, along with Dan Fluette. So the whole team is here and fighting and working away.
Social distancing.
Yes.
And a couple of our listeners have been asking, hey, you guys aren't social distancing. You're not 6 feet apart. And I had to reassure them that basically all of us have been in quarantine here in the War Room for like the last couple of weeks.
Quarantine and taking, what is it, what's the witch doctor gave us the regime that at least I'm following. If you're watching Witch Doctor.
What do you get, the Hinoki wood oil? Or what
No, try it over there, brother. It'll make a man of you, trust
the
me.
Chinese herbal medicines that Fauci...
I'm all into Chinese herbal. Don't be stinking on the Chinese herbal
I'm working.
medicines.
I got these great gummy multivitamins, so I mix them in with my regular gummy bears. They're quite tasty. No, I am taking that. I am taking all the regular stuff. So
that's not the gummy bears with the marijuana extract. What's that stuff called? We're not doing that.
CBD?
CBD, not doing CBD.
No,
okay,
I'm from
good.
Seattle. That's not my
isn't it
scene.
ironic? 6 months ago, CBD cured everything on planet Earth, and I don't hear anybody
much.
talking about CBD oil.
Hold on. How do you think I got better?
Why is the governor of Michigan now threatening doctors that recommend your malarial drug?
I think that the governor of Michigan is probably just not that smart a person, and I think she's probably reacting to the idea of people taking the drug off the marketplace for people who have rheumatoid arthritis or might have lupus or something like that. But, I mean, this is all part and parcel of this nonsense panic that we're watching around the country.
But why do you attack her intelligence? Why do you say that?
Well, because she's the only one, and she's a governor. She's not a doctor. I don't even know.
Well,
if
no,
she
she's
has
the only one.
right
She's the first one.
I'm not even sure she has the legal right to do what she's claiming she wants to do. We saw this in Nevada 2 days ago, and the governor there, no Nobel Prize winner, he used the example of the people in Arizona who had taken the chloroquine phosphate that is used to clean fish tanks, and he used that as his rationale. I mean, we've got to slow down. Everyone needs to take a big breath. I see Cuomo starting to, calm himself down. I think the whole country has to calm themselves down. There's an inevitability about all of this and all the screaming and crying and money in the world.
Nothing is inevitable. It's human action and human agency is going to get us through this. You're just going to – I got it right now. Jack Maxey's going to let the ball play him. I'm going to play the ball. Okay.
Jack also didn't watch the Today Show this morning with the images of hospitals and portable morgues and record.
They got to refer.
Okay, well then you guys are promising me that this plan where you're doing is not going to have morgues and not going to have dead. And
we're not saying that. We're not saying that, and we're not saying that. You're gonna have all of that, but you got to get ahead of this.
I look at any country and I'd try and follow what the Scandinavian countries and what Germany are doing. Somehow they seem to be doing quite well.
The Germans are doing very well. Germans are doing well because they're mass rolling out the tests, right? And they're mass rolling. Look, the
and then you're isolating.
Yeah, absolutely. Like intensely. By the way, they're not taking. By the way, Jack's starting to sound like my mom. I told her about this in January. She says to me, "If I die, I die." I'm like, no, this is not a way to approach this thing. By the way, you brought up Cuomo. Cuomo's just said that they need to build another 4 temporary hospitals with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
This is why they've got the 101st Airborne. They got the battalion, not a brigade.
Guys from Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The 101st, and they got 3 ID from Fort Hood coming up there too. Two combat field hospitals, I think, units coming up from Fort Campbell and from Fort Hood. Tell us about what's going on at Capitol Hill. What Massey actually has thrown down, and they're all coming back, right?
Yeah, and so Massey has tweeted out there, looks like he's on an 11-part Twitter thread at the moment, starting off with, "I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. I take that oath seriously. In a few moments, I will request a vote on the CARES Act, which means members of Congress will vote on it by pushing yes or no or present."
So what are her other options? What the Speaker has, and McCarthy's been working with her. What are the other options they have today to even get something done? If Massey, that's a Freudian slip. If Massey wants to have a vote, it really was. I didn't do that. I'm not trying to be snarky.
Well, they got to get to a quorum, and so the question is, I don't know how many
there's
members.
Not enough guys here. You need 218 for a quorum, right?
And
It's not even we're not even close.
Yeah, and so they're coming back. I also want to the coronavirus is taking Jack away at the moment.
Hey, the big Corona came in here and jumped on him. Right?
That was a little Copenhagen that went down the wrong pipe.
Speaking of calm, or who's not going to be calm, the General Motors communications team for the foreseeable future. President Trump tweeting at GM, a little bit of a spree here. He tweets out just within this last hour, as usual with this General Motors, things just never seem to work out. They say they're going to give us 40,000 much-needed ventilators very quickly. Now they're saying it will be 6,000 in late April, and they want top dollar. Always a mess with Mary B. Invoke P. So Mary B is Mary Barra, who's the CEO of GM. Invoke P, as he gets to in a moment, you'll see here, is the Defense Production Act. He also says General Motors must immediately open their stupidly abandoned Lordstown plant in Ohio and some other plants in all caps. Start making ventilators now. Ford, get going on ventilators fast. Hold on, Steve, because I see your. I see that he says Invoke P means Defense Production Act. And here,
just say that again.
Let me go. Invoke P means Defense Production Act. Then he also chimes in. I think this is the first time the Defense Production Act has been enacted via tweet. He writes. Oh, is that tweet not there?
No, but here's what they're going to do. They're going to sign, I think, an additional executive order that actually pulls the trigger and talks about how the structure of that's going to be. The Defense Production Act, the reason it's been controversial, and they said President Trump invoked it but hasn't been using it, he's now going to be directing, I think, U.S. companies to stand up and, hey, here's the deal. You're going to be making this. Here's the price. Yep. Here's your margin. Here's your profit.
Well, it looks like he just said that to GM and Ford.
I think Lordstown, I think in Ohio, we're going to be standing up a Lordstown plant.
But I think it was the chairman of Ford yesterday. They've been talking about this. They're going to use fans from the seats in F-150s to make ventilators. But he said, look, let's be frank. We're not going to be able to make a ventilator till June.
Right. You're not going to. This is not a quick solution.
The other tweets on the president's thing. We have just purchased many ventilators from some wonderful companies. Names and numbers will be announced later today. And then just 6 minutes ago, thousands of federal government delivered ventilators found in New York storage. New York must distribute now.
Okay, 5 o'clock. We're back on 77 WABC Talk Radio with the entire War Room team, and then tomorrow at 10 a.m. we'll continue this War Room Pandemic. Maxie, Miller, Kassam, and Bannon. See you at 5 o'clock.